everyone! Today I want to have some fun with Naphthamide Maroon by Daniel Smith. I have mentioned this color quite a few times. It really is my favorite at the moment. I don't know whether it's because it's winter and it sort of has this beautiful deep darkness to it, but I like using it in a variation of different things, which is combining it with other colors. I'll just quickly grab my sketchbook. So there we go. So here is a classic example where I combined this color with a very pastel palette and light colors, and it just looks so beautiful. So there is a number of things I like doing it, but I will talk about it in a separate video. Today I just want to do a few tests here. So on this piece of paper we're going to do the transparency test, the dispersion, glazing, granulation and darkest to lightest, to see the values that you can get in this color. And it's quite interesting because I like the very dark or the very light, nothing in between of it. So I will show you that, and then hopefully we'll have enough time left. I will want to play around mixing this Naphthamide Maroon with a variety of other colors from my regular watercolor palette, and I will talk you through what exactly colors I'm using, but there is a video here which I will link in the card, where you can see actually two videos, one making or creating this, the process of creating this palette, and then there is a video which is the complete palette. So if you're interested in the colors and in every single color, then you can go and have a look. Now, apologies for my husky voice. We've been sick for weeks, and then finally for a week or about a week we were okay, and then we sort of picked up something again, which is, you know, when your child goes to a nursery, there's just a soup of germs there, and it seems that we kind of keep getting one thing after the other. So anyways, that's my voice. I have a cup of tea here which I will try to sip on if I feel a bit croaky. Right, hopefully the light won't be too naughty today, going up and down, but I can see it's sort of now gone a bit down. Anyways, so let's start by squeezing out a bit of color. I'm just going to squeeze it out into this little, it's actually my watercolor palette, but I use the tin here. It's quite convenient for me. So firstly, it's not escaping. It's not one of those colors that is a liquid color or likes to escape. So it behaves really well, stays there, doesn't erupt from the from the tube. Now let's look at the simple information of a Naphthamide Maroon. So starting with, it seems like it's a single pigment. So it says here, sorry, benzimidazolone, if you can read that, maroon. And then it's a PR 171. So that's fantastic news that it's a single pigment. Gamma arabic solution is used as the binder. In terms of light fastness, it's a 1, so very good. And the rest of the things we will find out today. Okay, so I'm going to use my brush that I like using for swatches because it's not a very picky brush, so you can really do some work with it. So this is a Jackson's Quill brush 10-0. You know, it's been my favorite brush, or one of my favorite brushes. Okay, so let's start. Now, what is transparency? Transparency is basically to find out whether there is any like a white pigment. Not in this case because it's a single pigment, so it's very unlikely that there is going to be any of that opacity there. But some colors can not have a white pigment in there, yet still be on the opaque side if they're, for example, a little bit too granulating, and things like that. So let's look at this. Now I have two black lines here, and on the first one we're going to go very dark, or like very dark to slightly lighter, and then on the other one we'll go from the middle and kind of lightest, just to see how it behaves. So I'm going to really load up the color. I mean, I can already see, I don't know if you can see, but it's not opaque. So the transparency is really good here, because even though I'm loading it up with such a big amount of pigment, I can actually see the black line shine through. So I will then continue here and go to the lightest of it. So there you go. Let's just try and move this slightly more here. And then I will also add a bit more of the dark right here, so that it's really at its darkest. Okay, next thing is called dispersion. Now I already kind of tinted my water a little bit, so maybe I should have started with dispersion, but it doesn't matter. It will be a little bit tinted. You might not even see it. No, it's fine, it's not pink. The point of this is to wet your watercolor paper. Now this, by the way, is 300 GSM. It has tiny little bit of texture, which is perfect for me because I don't like hot pressed watercolor paper. I'm going to wait a little bit so that it's not too wet. At the moment I have a good puddle there, which you can hopefully see. So that needs to dry out just a tiny little bit. So this is the paper that I'm using. It's by Canson and it's the Aquarelle watercolor paper, 300 GSM. Cold pressed heavyweight paper. Okay, so at about this point, I'm just going to use dry brush and just suck up any remaining water that sort of is going that way. And now we're going to look at how the color moves. So the movement of the color, and I've got way too much pigment here. So I'm going to just dab the brush in the wet area and see how it's going to disperse. There we go. Wow. That is pretty strong dispersion. Some colors tend to just sit there, so when you touch your brush to the paper, wet paper, it kind of just sits there. Now, this indicates that the movement is very strong. Typically, if your watercolor doesn't move as strong, what you can do is you can help it with something like this. So this is a synthetic ox gall. The real ox gall solution smells pretty bad, so this is a good substitute for it. And it's by QOR, so this tends to help your watercolors do this type of thing. Now, that means that the color is going to blend with other colors very well, but also there is, for me personally, a slight downside to it, which means that if I want to keep it at that darkest, I will have to build it up. And as you can see, it was the darkest kind of just dispersed and moved around and spread very strongly. And so that is one of the most strongest dispersions I've ever seen. So if you want to build up the color, you'll have to do a glaze, and this is what we're going to look at here. So this color is perfect for glazing because when you first start with it, so I've got enough color here, it sort of starts beautiful and kind of really strong, but as it dries, it tends to kind of have this shift. So what I'm going to do here is just go all the way down like so, add a bit more water, and basically add a little bit more water because I don't want it to be streaky. I'm just going to go all the way up again like that and let it dry a little bit. You'll see that color shift starting to happen fairly soon, but we will glaze it over and see what happens then. Granulation. Now, how to test granulation? I find it is the best way as you test a color separation, which is a totally different thing. So color separation happens in watercolors that have many pigments in there. So for instance, what is the typical one? Moon Glow. So Daniel Smith Moon Glow has, if I'm not mistaken, 2, 3 maybe, or even more. I think up to 3 pigments in there, and they are all quite different. So they separate into kind of lilac-y, purpley, pinky, bluey tones, and to help that, you need to add a bit of water onto it. So that's the same thing we're going to do now for the granulation. So what you do here is just do a regular swatch, whichever strength of it you want, and that doesn't really matter. It has to be fairly wet, and then as you start seeing the watercolor or the paper getting a bit dry, you're just going to dab some water into this. This is also sort of helps to create blossoming and all of that. Once this dries, you will see the pigments actually granulate, if it is a granulating watercolor. Then we're going to go back to glazing, and I want you now to see what happens, or how, if you wanted to create the strongest, what you need to do. So what you're going to do is you're going to really load the pigment, and we're going to do the same strength here, and you can see the glaze, and see whether this will dry out to even darkest. Actually, I will pull it out slightly further so we can, like halfway, we can do. See, with watercolor, try not to mess around and go too much over it. So this is second glaze, and then I will show you a third just at the top right there to see, you know, how deep, to get to the deepest what you need to do. So generally, in some colors you can get it from one go if you load it up with a lot of pigment and minimal water, and it will dry and stay similar color. And then in this case, I find that to get it to that perfect depth of it, I need to do 3 times. So I'll show you that as well. So the granulation is starting to come through now, which is basically these particles starting to form a shape rather than just a smooth wash. So in a way, we kind of looked here at a diversity that you can get of the darkest to kind of medium and light, but I do want to have a more smooth ombre effect here. So I'm going to try and do this in one go, and we will see what we can create again from the darkest to the lightest. So this is pretty much the darkest, and I'll try to continue about halfway and then add some water. I'm going to go back and then continue. So the very light of the color is super pretty. It's like you could make a beautiful blossom painting with it. This color is not necessarily great for washes. Like if you want to do a gradual wash, you can see a bit of streaking there. So either very watered out or very dark, it's perfect. But somewhere in the middle, it kind of starts to give you that bit of a streak. So this area here is my least favorite dimension of this color. I absolutely adore it at the lightest and the darkest, and slightly closer to the center, but right in the middle is the color that I find a little bit dull. Like you can see here, it sort of dulls out a little, but you can see the vibrancy here is now staying a lot better, but you can make it even more intense, which I have to wait completely for it to dry. So far so good. The granulation is not too strong, as the color starting to go a bit more to the side here. It seems to have also settled the granulation. So I'm just going to pick up the water from the side here and just let it dry out. but the blossoming is just beautiful. All these veining that you can create is stunning. Again, not every watercolor can do that. And let's see what happens. So I think I will separate this video looking at the camera. It's about 17 minutes we have recorded. I don't want it to be super long because I do want to have a bit of playtime with mixing other colors. Okay, so again, I'm going to now use minimal water and really mix up. Actually, you can't see it, but I'm mixing up over here quite a creamy paste, kind of like a, not paste, but a mix. And at this point, I'm just going to go over it in one go, like so. And that is as beautifully dark as you can get it. Now it will dry and just lift a tiny little bit, but at the third point of it, it's pretty much done. So it's not going to have that major color shift. And look at the beautiful pink colored water that you get when you wash the brush out. So let me dry it and then show you the finished version. Okay, I don't want to over dry the paper as it starts to buckle when you drying it too much or adding a bit of too much of the heat. So basically you can see how stunning it is. Now let's look at the transparency a bit up close and personal. And then the dispersion, which I just touched it right here in the middle, and this is as strong around the edges as it is in the middle. And it even carried out the slightly little bit of the pigment all the way up here, but you can barely see it. But basically we're looking at this dispersion here. So very, very strong, incredibly strong. And it's interesting how it sort of stopped here and then just sort of taken this out a little bit, but at a very different level of it. Okay, so then glazing. So it's superb for glazing. Granulation. So let me just say something about glazing. Some colors don't really have such a big difference when glazing. There isn't hardly like a difference between the lightest and the darkest, so there is no point really of glazing it. And some colors benefit because they have such a big variety of tone, so they go from the lightest to the darkest. The gap between the two is huge, so that's why a color like this contributes from glazing really well. Granulation, not so much anywhere here, but slight granulation around the veining. So I'd say it's probably a medium granulation, but if you like this type of effect in watercolor, try this, it would be beautiful. And then a darkest to lightest. Again, you can see it's a little bit streaky around this area, so here it behaves really well, and sort of around there. I find it's easiest to work with it at these two ends, and a little bit difficult with the middle because then you have to guess the right water amount, and you can get it slightly lighter then to avoid the streakiness. So it's a little bit tricky, but it's a stunning color. So I hope you now understand my obsession with it. I'll link it down below in case you're interested and want to check it out for yourself. So thanks for watching, and see you in the video where we are going to have fun with mixing it with other colors.